It's Sunday, June 9, 2024. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minutenews. Our guest today is an epidemiologist and health economist, a former Harvard researcher and teacher, and co-founder of the World Health Network. He's also on the COVID-19 Mortality Expert Committee for the World Health Organization. Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding, welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Happy to be back.
So it's been a really interesting week. You know, we thought we'd kind of got over COVID and the pandemic, and yet the Republicans decided to bring Dr. Anthony Fauci back for a public hearing and kind of hauled him over the coals. It was a subcommittee, an oversight select subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic. And they questioned the former head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. He's now been retired for a couple of years, about the origins of COVID and basically trying to blame Dr. Fauci, who didn't have a huge amount to do with that aspect of this. He's very much became the face of COVID-19 or the response to COVID-19.
You think that's appropriate? Do the American people deserve to be abused like that, Mr. Fauci? Because you're not doctor. You're Mr. Fauci in my few minutes. No, I don't need your answer. I want to talk about this right here.
Mr. Chairman,
objection. I reclaim my time. Mr. Raskin.
Gentlelady will suspend.
Mr. Chairman,
Point of order.
Just in terms of the rules of decorum, are we allowed to deny that a doctor is a doctor just because we don't want him to be a doctor?
Yes, because in my time, that man does not deserve to have a license. As a matter of fact, it should be revoked, and he belongs in prison.
Gentlelady will suspend. The gentlelady should recognize the doctor as a doctor.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, is this what we have become? Is this what we have devolved into?
So I'll just start by asking you, why do you think the Republicans just won't let it lie when it comes to this subject?
Yeah, this topic, well, first of all, COVID is not exactly over. The declared pandemic is over, but we're still having surges. But right now, even in Hawaii and California, we're seeing quite an uptick in cases and ER visits. But on the Fauci thing, like, for example, there's been so many conspiracies about lab leaks, and you know, their punching bag number one has always been Fauci. And this COVID select committee, by the way, it wasn't around when, in the first few years, it was only created in 2023 when the Republicans took over. So we should call it the Republican Select Subcommittee on the coronavirus. And it's mostly focused on lab leak origins more than anything else. And so this is why they're just trying to drag Fauci out of retirement to, you know, answer some of their long time questions. Now, I think in many ways there's different there's lab leak of a natural virus, which is possible, right? And then there's the bioengineering, bioweapon lab leak. That is a much more fringe conspiracy theory. I think, first of all, it could be a natural virus or a leak of a natural virus. That's perfectly plausible. I think there's nothing around that you know says that's impossible. And you know, and even if that happened, Fauci isn't responsible. So I think at the end of the day, these people are trying to dig, and in certain ways, it's fueling the ultra right wing kind of like bioweapon, conspiracy that there was an intentional pandemic, blah blah, kind of thing. And I think this is where scientists. I usually don't talk about this topic because it's not my favorite topic. It's not a topic in which everyday people need to, know how to protect themselves. This is like really into minutiae of what is gain of function research and what is, these kind of dangerous or not so dangerous research. But when they start attacking scientists and trying to question scientists and muddy the field so that, oh, you can't trust scientists, they're all pharma shills, or, they're putting a microchip in and, these vaccines are all trying to program you. That is what when they were asking Fauci all these stupid questions. Some are stupid, some are not, but most of them are pretty dumb. That's what they're trying to actually bring along. And a lot of these conspiracy theories are quite dangerous to public health, American health, and global health.
Well, that's really my concern, isn't it? Because when you get people who are not experts, and some of the people up there, Jim Jordan and Marjorie Taylor Greene, I mean, they're not even experts at being politicians or Congress people, let alone scientists. It really kind of dilutes expertise. And this is my concern, because obviously public health is a massive, an important area of government. And it's something that we rely on and hopefully we should take for granted. I mean, it should be just baked into government, and they should be doing their best at all times. But the problem we have now is that when the next pandemic comes, and it's widely predicted that there will probably be another one, that half the population, or certainly, a percentage of the population who are conspiracists and MAGA Republicans, and certainly Jim Jordan and Marjorie Taylor Greene, they will not heed the public health advice, because, this idea that the government should be telling us what to do in order to protect not just ourselves but each other has fallen out of favor because it's been weaponized.
They're trying to foment a distrust of scientists and foment, resistance to any public health government authorities, because, don't let the government tell you what to do. Government's only evil, and scientists, they're pharma shills, or scientists, they're just trying to control us. This kind of stuff is incredibly dangerous. Vaccine adherence rates have dropped precipitously. Even aside from COVID vaccine, which is pretty abysmal, like the boosters, the uptake of the boosters, the last 2 cycles of boosters have been about 15%, 20% among liberal areas and 10% in conservative areas. 10%, 1 in 10 people in conservative areas are even bothering to get the booster shot. It's the penetration of this vaccine resistance is pretty high. But even traditional vaccines like measles vaccines, pertussis, many other vaccines, the rates have dropped a lot. And you're seeing measles outbreaks, pertussis, whooping cough outbreaks, right? And it's almost like, they're not trying to make America great again. They're trying to make, vaccine eliminating diseases great again, and bring back these, disease from the 1800s. And you see this also with, like, even outside of vaccines, like, this conspiracy that, you don't need anything but hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. Or that, don't listen to science about raw milk. We don't need pasteurization. God gave you an immune system. You can drink raw milk straight from the tap, of these cow. And I don't think people realize how dangerous that is, because there's so much misinformation, whether it's vaccines, whether it's climate change, whether it's raw milk, which is, pasteurization was one of the greatest inventions of the 1800s that saved so many lives. But somehow this raw milk, the anti-pasteurization raw milk movement is coming back. And somehow this anti-vaccine movement is coming back. And it's like people don't even remember polio or measles. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. And this basic attack of science, it is literally a war on science, because science offers, as Al Gore would say, an inconvenient truth about many things. Climate change is real. A lot of these viruses are very dangerous, and you need to protect yourselves, and you need to rely on science to protect yourselves. But this attack on scientists, because somehow I think the right has discovered that, science and public health to them has an exorbitant amount of power in this world to tell people what to do. And it's just something that right now they're seeking to destroy in many ways. And we have a whole presidential candidate, RFK Jr., who's inherently anti-vax. His nonprofit is inherently the king of anti-vax propaganda. But
although he claims he never said that, but the contrary is obviously true. So is there a problem though, in as much as that the pharmaceutical industry, because it is so profitable, and because there isn't really a healthcare system in the US, there is health that you can access if you're wealthy enough.
We have sick care, right?
Yeah, sick care, right? But there's no joined up healthcare system, and so consequently, people do kind of maybe look down upon the medical industry because it has rampant profiteering and obviously so much lobbying and kickbacks with drugs to politicians and various public figures. I mean, is part of the problem that capitalism in the US, rampant capitalism, I should call it, and price gouging and everything that goes with that, it is also partly to blame for people's cynicism?
Well, I think the cynicism of things like, exorbitant prices of insulin, exorbitant prices of certain cancer drugs, of, EpiPens for people with allergies, right?
Yeah.
These kind of things really upset people and really upset me. I've been a long time advocate against these price gouging. And in certain ways, to a lay public, I guess, these damn pharma companies, these damn insurance companies, they're just trying to profiteer off of our backs of being sick. People are rightfully angry. But what I think the right wing is trying to do is steer a lot of this anger at, look at them, scientists trying to profiteer or something. Scientists, by the way, Fauci made $0. He testified under oath. He made $0 from the coronavirus pandemic. And the only royalties he got was $122 a year for something invented 25 years ago, right? And trust me, there's a joke in academia. It's like crime, science doesn't pay. It's right. Like crime, academia doesn't pay. Because for the most part, scientists don't make money off of their research. They are literally, living hand to mouth, spoon to mouth in terms of their grant money and just keeping afloat. And their salaries are abysmal compared to other people who went to a school as many years as they did. I think the anger at the healthcare system is very justified about health insurance, pharmaceutical companies, pharmacies, PBMs, all these drug makers and whatnot. But it's misdirected at the scientists. The scientists are researchers. They're not people who are, setting the prices. These are corporations. These are private equity firms that are setting these prices of these patents and whatnot, right? And all these licensing fees and over-counter prices. They are the ones who are screwing people over. But by conflating, like Peter Hotez, vaccine scientists. But, if anything, if you look into any deeper, Peter Hotez invents a patent-free vaccine. His research is on vaccines for, say, hookworms, which is like this neglected tropical disease, not a, mainstream disease that you can profit off of. And, his COVID vaccine is, patent-free. He collects no royalties. And these are what actual scientists are doing, not doing the profiteering. But by conflating it to science and medical research and pharma together as if they're a single entity is inherently dangerous. Because I think there's lots of people who want to, for example, deny climate change. All the oil companies, right, funding anti-climate change policies. Well, their number one target is to undermine the science, right? We've seen that. We've seen that playbook happen for decades, undermining the science of climate change. And same with public health. Now, somehow public health and these epidemiologists and vaccines, they're like controlling our lives. Now it's time to undermine them, And I think this is the stuff where, somehow the right-wing freedom machine has now decided that science is one of those types of people groups that we need to put down in terms of their power and influence.
But this is the legacy of Trumpism, isn't it? Because the way that he handled the pandemic or mishandled the pandemic, not just those embarrassing press conferences where he started off by going, it's just a couple of cases and by the weekend it's going to be gone. And then the next thing you know, he's telling people that some kind of domestic bleach will kill it, or shining a light from inside the body. And then we had those famous moments with Dr. Deborah Birx with her head in her hands, probably wanting to hang herself with that scarf.
Supposing we hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light, and I think you said that hasn't been checked, but you're going to test it. And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way. And I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting. Right, and then I see the disinfectant, where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number of the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with.
You know, I remember that so well. It was 4 years ago, and I remember that so well, and thinking to myself, this is not just dangerous for this moment in history, but you know, there'll be a whole generation of people will suffer because of the way that this is being handled. And I suppose it was unfortunate that COVID happened in an election year, because Trump obviously was more interested in the election. Well, saying that in hindsight.
They said, "Oh, watch, after the election, COVID is going to all disappear."
Yeah.
That it's clearly just an election ploy to scare you. Well, clearly it didn't disappear.
But what's so dangerous about that is that it is putting the U.S. decades behind other nations when it comes to the level of public trust for things like COVID and pandemics, but also climate change. And there still is a huge misunderstanding about the man-made effects of climate change in the US. And I've said before on the show that I feel like the US has almost had to put climate change to one side whilst they deal with the imminent threat of fascism, and then can kind of go back to that if Joe Biden is elected.
Yeah. I think that the legacy of the Trump era is, of course, one of the worst, because we could have stopped it earlier. We could have saved so many lives. One analysis shows we could have easily saved 200,000, maybe even 300,000 lives if the vaccination rates were higher. That it wasn't so politicized as, this is the government trying to control you. COVID isn't real. COVID is mild. There's many kinds of misinformation, right? There's outright disinformation, misinformation, and then there's misinformation in terms of downplaying the severity. Kids are practically immune. It's like, no, kids are not immune. There was an JAMA article that says kids were heavily impacted. In fact, 2% of all children's deaths were COVID during the 2022 years. I think the Trump legacy of this, the anti-science wave, it's just a political election ploy that COVID will be over the moment the election is over, I think has fueled a lot of right-wingism attacks against all scientists, vaccine scientists, virologists, epidemiologists. I was on the receiving end for some, but I know that other people got it much worse than me. And I think Fauci is an example of that, right? That somehow, all these millions of dollars of royalties flowing to Fauci. Oh, no. I collect $0 of COVID pandemic related royalties.
But him as an individual, I mean, you couldn't meet a nicer person. This is what's so sad about his story, is that, everybody who's ever worked with him, whether it be through the years that he was trying to combat HIV and successfully in many ways, going into communities, really talking to people, one of the first government officials to actually go onto the streets and really get involved in the gay community in the 1980s and 90s in such a different way to how it had ever been done before. So he was very much a trailblazer. Then, of course, the same with Ebola, and Ebola kind of came and went because of some excellent decisions and research that was done from his department. And then with COVID, it's so sad that like towards the end of his career, because of Trumpism, medicine became weaponized. Expertise was weaponized. And so he became the victim of all of this vitriol. And we need people like him and people like yourself. It's an essential part of keeping us safe and keeping us alive. And I do feel sorry for the fact that he's having to face this, because the whole thing is a fallacy. I mean, it's just made up. He didn't put a foot wrong. And maybe is it that people don't understand how recommendations and medical advice will ebb and flow in a pandemic, and how 1 minute they'll say no masks and the next day they'll say, yes, we do need masks.
I think there was a lot of confusion early on because, people talk about the 6 feet rule a lot.
Yeah.
The 6 feet rule was from a misunderstanding. By the way, it's from a CDC document, not from Fauci. Fauci didn't invent it. It was from a CDC guideline, assuming something is a droplet, right?
Right.
If it's a droplet, which, it's a big, heavy thing and it falls down because of gravity, like a cannon eventually gets pulled down by gravity, then 6 feet, would keep you safe. But of course, we now know that the virus is, airborne, and 6 feet is not enough. The virus has tiny particles that will diffuse throughout a whole room. It will stay in a room even after the original person was gone. It's not the 6 feet rule that's relevant. It's the air disinfection and ventilation and that we need. And also that, early on they thought that, if you don't have symptoms, you're asymptomatic, you can't transmit. Well, we clearly know if you're asymptomatic, you can. It's like 50% of all transmission is asymptomatic transmission before you even have symptoms. So I think Fauci, by the way, he admitted these are wrong. Like he's like, we now have a better understanding that's more airborne, not just 6 feet. We have a better understanding that it's masking not just when you're symptomatic. You can transmit even if you have 0 symptoms. And also he admits that, early on they thought the vaccine will be perfect against all future variants. Don't worry about variants. But clearly they were proven wrong that the vaccine needs to be updated over time. You can't just hold on to the laurels of the original vaccine for each, coming year. And so they eventually owned up to those mistakes. But
are they mistakes, or are they just changing guidance?
What I would say is, first of all, early mistakes, as in like they assumed too much. They overassumed. They overassumed that you didn't transmit. If you don't have symptoms, you overassumed that it wasn't airborne. Right? They overassumed that the vaccine would be fine against other variants. But those, they corrected course. Those are from basically lack of full information. That was the mistake. The mistake was overassuming based on lack of full information about the transmission properties of the virus. Not as in like some willful, actual lying about certain things, right? Those are just like updating in terms of the information over time. Now, there's also lots of some misinformation about, hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. There were fraudulent papers that were retracted, by the way. They were retracted that supposedly showed, ivermectin having efficacy.
Yes.
And subsequently some other analysis that did meta-analysis, averaged them, included them, but then the original paper was retracted, but the subsequent paper that used the average from those retracted papers didn't get retracted. And so there's lots of misinformation, because if you don't know the full medical literature, if you just cite one study, and honestly, in medical literature, if something's not replicated, that's actually a red flag, then it's actually very highly suspicious. And I think this is where, a lot of the lay public are not experts in reading medical literature, not to mention synthesizing them or keeping track of which papers use which studies that were retracted, right?
But it's the same with the media, though, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. It's 15 seconds.
The media didn't know how to read.
The media doesn't keep up with it.
Yeah.
Members of Congress or their staffers don't keep up with this kind of stuff, right? You need someone who actually does systematic reviews and follows one specific literature very closely to know, that's where it's retracted. Oh, that's suspicious number. That's false. That's impossible. Like that, there's no verification or validation for that, or that was misanalyzed. That's kind of stuff. Like the media is just as culpable in many ways for being naively following certain narratives, right?
Yes.
Because, in certain ways, Joe Rogan, I think he means well. Like, for example, he's not anti-science per se. Like, he has Neil deGrasse Tyson on. He has other scientists on. He's not anti-science per se. But I think the issue is that because he's so right-wing, his staffers, his editors, and other people around him feed him studies that show, see, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine. Oh, look how dangerous the vaccine is. Whenever it's like a very narrow and, completely not the full picture.
But he's trying to get ratings, Eric. Isn't this the problem?
Yeah,
because of rampant capitalism in media, it's all clickbait. If you say
Fauci is wrong, you get tons of ratings.
Yeah.
If you say so-and-so scientist is lying, it's like, oh, so a scientist is lying? I have to tune in, as opposed to let's discuss the empirical dynamics of media and interpretation. Yeah. No one would tune into a Rogan if he started that way, if his shows were like as. But
isn't this going to be a problem going forward for the US now that because COVID was very much the test bed for how the media behave and how the right wing behave and how it's politicized and now and I think people like Ron DeSantis in Florida were a perfect example of this, where they wanted to show strength, and by saying, well, we're not going to shut down, we're not going to take that advice, we're going to keep going, we're Americans, we're free, we're patriots. Obviously, more people died in Florida than in many places, and we saw that across the country, that in red states there were more people dying as a result of coronavirus. Or
after the vaccine rollout. Yes.
After the vaccine rollout.
So after the vaccine rollout, there was a huge increase in red states. And that's where the 300,000 number comes from. Because after the vaccine rollout, the excess deaths in those states were just insane.
But this is all because politicians behave like strongmen. And they want to give the impression that it's a political thing, and that public health is not something that can transcend politics. Yeah. And that is really dangerous, isn't it? Because, as I said at the beginning, the next pandemic is in the same way that pandemic was predicted. And as we know, Obama had this kind of guide for a pandemic that was left in the, as part of the handover, the peaceful transfer of power, which was pretty much ignored by the Trump organization.
I think it really is at the crux. It's a power thing because, politicians don't fund NIH a lot. And there's we need to find the cure for cancer, but cure for diabetes, all these kind of things they support.
Yeah.
We need to do research on, geology and, all these kind of things are fine. But whenever the science somehow starts usurping their political power, like public health restrictions and public health rules to basically save lives, and they realize, holy shit, a public health emergency can override their political powers? What? Public health needs to be, kept down to where they belong, to show they can't mess with my political power as governor. And that's where I think that's a lot of where the attack comes from, because public health suddenly had this enormous importance and central role in saving lives that and dictated a lot of what people did. And that's where you can't tell me what to do, blah, blah, blah. I have my own immune system, and masks don't work, even though they do. Vaccines kill, even though they save, infinitely more lives. And by the way, vaccines, the AstraZeneca vaccine had a lot of problems. Johnson & Johnson vaccine had some problems, but Pfizer Moderna had much less. And besides myocarditis with the first 2 shots, there's myocarditis almost disappeared with boosters,
Yes.
and again, it's compared to the number of people saved, it's just leaps and bounds, hundreds and thousands of times greater life savings than any side effects. So I think those kind of things, political power is, at the end of the day, all boils down to power. Public health somehow took a central role during the pandemic era and basically usurped politicians' powers. And that's why they have to knock it down, because it's too inconvenient, right? And also inconvenient for a lot of corporate interests. For example, some of the people who are most against any restrictions are, commercial real estate, right? A lot of these companies that suffered during the pandemic, and because of, that's why a lot of these WeWork and all these companies, went belly up during the pandemic. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but, it's also unfortunate that, 1.2 million Americans died, 16 to 20 million people worldwide died. It's unfortunate. And I always tell some people say, well, it was mild. You know what? Who wasn't mild? The people who suffered long COVID, which is which is 7% of Americans, by the way, as according to the latest CDC survey. This is a CDC study. And all those people who died, because, just like the pirate saying, dead men tell no tales, all those people who suffered and succumbed to COVID aren't here to go and tell Jim Jordan, Marjorie Taylor Greene, no, you're an idiot. The COVID was real. It was severe, did kill a lot of people, did maim a lot of people. And, vaccines could have saved my life, if you weren't so, smacking down and trying to spread disinformation and misinformation about this. They can't tell Jim Jordan. Like, if they ever asked me what I think, I would say, well, you shouldn't just ask me. You should ask those people who died. But we can't.
And I think everybody knows somebody who either died or had it very, very seriously. I certainly do in both categories. And I recognize that it's something that, now I feel much better educated about how it would work. And I had no problems wearing a mask for 2.5 years. I barely went out. I did all my shopping online, and actually I felt, I didn't even get COVID. I mean, this was the thing. And I feel like it's actually really simple, isn't it? It's like the argument that masks don't work when you just think about the whole concept of a barrier method. I often say, like, if you went for surgery, open heart surgery, how would you feel if your surgeon didn't wear a mask?
Yeah.
Would you be happy about that?
Yeah. And especially, surgical masks, not even the best kind of mask. But I think it's pretty obvious where if you are truly in a vulnerable state, like on an operating table, as you mentioned, right? You would absolutely be for a mask. If you're working with some construction demolition and you're tearing out all these walls with asbestos in it, yeah, hell, you would wear a mask. And I don't see construction people ever saying masks don't work. Masks do work.
Yeah.
And some of these particles are in these constructions way smaller than COVID. Masks do work, but it's just inconvenient because it's one of those things that's, it basically, being anti-mask is almost like it's a symbol. It's like, it's my government can't tell me what to do rebellion, right?
Yeah. Never mind about them telling themselves what to do, because of course, you can take the government advice and then say, okay, I have made the decision, which is what I did. I didn't wear a mask because the government told me to. I did it because I wanted to. And I think that, it's a very simple differential.
The only thing is with that is that we recommend everyone wear a mask because two-way masking is way more effective than one-way masking, right? And these are things where if everyone wears a mask, then there's less virus spread around. And those who are, children, vulnerable, or don't wear masks perfectly are still protected if more people wear masks. In theory, if everyone did it, yes, it would be way better than if just.
But this is an issue of collective responsibility, though, isn't it?
I know, and same with vaccines. Vaccines. Now they're not perfect, but if everyone took it or it reached that herd immunity threshold, for example, 95% vaccination rates for measles, then the remaining 5% who aren't vaccinated would be protected by the 95% who are. Right? This is where protecting your neighbors. But I feel like it's weird, drunk driving, besides obviously don't get yourself killed drunk driving, is you don't want to kill other people, right? The whole organization's Mothers Against Drunk Driving, the whole thing is don't think of other people. But we don't have like this, you can't tell me what to do. I can drink all the alcohol I want and drive my own American car.
But it did take kind of 20 or 30 years to really get that message down.
And same with seatbelts, same with airbags.
Yeah.
Oh my God, trying to get people to wear seatbelts early on.
Right.
There was quite an anti-seatbelt movement as well.
Yeah.
But the drunk driving thing, in certain ways, people should know better because, unlike seatbelts and helmets where it's a self-protection thing, drunk driving actually, you limit yourself from alcohol to not only protect yourself, but also protect others around you. There's a social responsibility around that. And same with like smoking. We have smoking rules, not just so don't kill yourself. You can go smoke in your own house if you want. But there's secondhand smoke that kills. We know secondhand smoking kills. Everyone agrees on that, right? But somehow secondhand smoke, secondhand air of COVID, secondhand alcohol effects of drunk driving in which you kill other people on a highway, somehow with COVID, don't you dare tell me what to do. And but
that's Trumpism,
around,
Eric. That's
alcohol
Trumpism
causing car crashes.
Yeah,
it's just liberal hysteria.
But it wouldn't have happened. I don't believe it would have happened if Donald Trump wasn't the president, and even if George Bush was the president, it wouldn't have happened because there is a level of critical thinking and respect for science and respect for research and respect for changing advice. And really delivering it in a coherent way, And I think that again is why Trump is such a dangerous figure, because it's not just his views on abortion or on immigration or whatever. It is the fact that he is completely ill-equipped to deal with anything that doesn't have his name in the title. Yeah. And so, we're now seeing the effects of that. Hey, listen, we have to take a quick break, but I want to come back and talk about the few cases of bird flu that have now crossed over into humans this week, which is certainly concerning. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. Living a more heart-healthy life fuels everything you do. Introducing 3-in-1 blood pressure support plus COQ10 from Superbeats Heart Chews Advanced. Paired with a healthy lifestyle, the grapeseed extract in Superbeats is clinically shown to be nearly 2 times more effective at promoting normal blood pressure than a healthy lifestyle alone. New Superbeats Heart Chews Advanced support healthy COQ2 levels, an important nutrient for your heart health. COQ10 generates 95% of the cellular energy that your heart needs, but it can decline with age, stress, and statin use. Heart-healthy energy can now come without the crash. Superbeats Heart Chews also support healthy circulation without stimulants. Find out how you can get a free 30-day supply on bundles of new Superbeats Heart Chews Advanced and save 15% for a limited time only by going to superbeatsradio.com and use the promo code WEEKEND. That's SuperBeets radio.com with the promo code WEEKEND. I've always found it difficult to find clothes that I like to wear, and when I find one thing that works, I just buy loads of them and just wear the same thing all the time. Well, men's closets were due for a radical reinvention, and Rhone stepped up to the challenge. Rhone's commuter collection is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible set of products known to man. And here's why. Rhone helps you get ready for any occasion. The commuter collection offers the world's most comfortable pants, dress shirts, zips, and polos. You'll never have to worry about what to wear when you've got the Rhone commuter collection. The comfortable four-way stretch fabric provides breathability and flexibility that leaves you free to enjoy what life throws your way, from your commute to work or your 18 holes of golf. It's time to feel confident without the hassle. With Rhone's wrinkle release technology, wrinkles disappear as you stretch and wear the products. It's that easy. And with Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, you'll be smelling fresh and clean all day long. And on top of that, Rhone is 100% machine washable, so you can ditch the dry cleaner altogether. I personally love a technical fabric, something that is advanced and uses technology to make a more comfortable and more modern outfit. Now, the commuter collection can get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. So head to rhone.com/Anthony and use promo code Anthony to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to rhone.com/Anthony and use code Anthony, ANTHONY. It's time to find your corner office comfort. We're back on the weekend show with Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding, and your experience as an epidemiologist and really kind of a researcher, like somebody who looks to the origins of these things. We've been talking about how it's been weaponized by the Republican Party and how Dr. Fauci has been scapegoated, and that horrific hearing, which was just, all guns pointed at. It was like a firing squad, really, at Dr. Fauci, which was very worrying. And in fact, I noticed that they posted their own conclusions, saying that Fauci shows no remorse for the millions of lives affected by his divisive rhetoric and his unscientific policies. He didn't apologize to the thousands of Americans who lost their jobs because they refused the novel vaccine, nor did he apologize to children experiencing severe learning loss. I mean, my kids coped very well. They actually enjoyed wearing their masks with characters on them and even doing schoolwork remotely. But the point is that, politics and medicine clearly do not mix. And what we're looking at now is, and you've been posting about this bird flu, I don't know if you would call it an outbreak yet, but it's certainly a new human case of bird flu. In fact, Dr. Rick Bright, a virologist, wrote in the New York Times this week that he said a third human case of H5 bird flu just diagnosed in a Michigan farm worker. The individual worked on a dairy farm, didn't wear PPE. The CDC said this is the first human case of the H5 virus in the US to report more typical symptoms of acute respiratory illness associated with influenza virus infection. Just tell us about this, and is it something we need to think about?
Yeah, thanks. The Michigan case was actually quite worrisome because previously, the Texas case was just conjunctivitis, pink eye, and he didn't have respiratory symptoms and quickly recovered without any major issues. While this Michigan farm worker did get actually really sick with respiratory issues. And traditionally, we thought that, bird flu, we think it might cross over into humans, but it's not well adapted to humans up till now. We still don't know whether it's crossed that threshold yet because, birds have certain receptors for this bird flu that humans lack, except in the eye. But there are ways in which the virus can infect humans. It takes a higher dose, but it's still possible. And that's why in certain ways, the CDC has been asking all farm workers, whether it's poultry or dairy or veterinarians, to wear PPEs, and not just one mask, but also full PPEs, gowns, splash guards, gloves, masks, goggles, the whole shebang. Obviously, that's not happening right now on farms. And the greater the amount of dose, if you give the virus practice crossing over into humans, it will have that ability to further mutate, right? Because then it'll adapt to human physiology, because it's not adapted to human physiology yet, but it could. And that's where, this kind of respiratory case in Michigan is very worrisome. It's like, why did he have a respiratory case from cows? Now, humans have died in the past. We do have people who've died of bird flu, several hundred in the last couple of years since WHO started tracking it. But in terms of cow to human transmission, and in the US, that's never happened before, and especially with respiratory symptoms. I think in many ways, even though this person survived, but he had respiratory symptoms, which your respiratory lining isn't supposed to have the same receptors for the bird flu as your eyes, that's a big deal. It shouldn't normally infect easily, but it did. And clearly, this is why the whole reason of we need to wear PPEs, right? Even though it's not a human flu, but we know it can infect humans with sufficiently high dose. And this is where we know it's on a lot of farms right now. And we know, by the way, that raw milk can be infectious. Even pasteurized milk. There's one study that says no, one study that says actually pasteurized milk could still harbor small amounts of active virus. And, raw meat, the virus can actually survive. If you cook it to medium rare, the virus can still survive. If you cook it well done, it can't. But all these kind of things that we need to be very careful of, because if it truly gives the opportunity for the virus to cross over and adapt to humans, then we're in deep trouble, because bird flu has a very, very high mortality compared to other illnesses.
Is it a problem that, once again, going back to rampant capitalism, that the two major meat and poultry suppliers in the US, it all boils down to two companies, right? It's Tyson and Purdue. I mean, that's basically where most of the meat and poultry comes from in the US, that is being distributed all over the country. Meaning that when something does go wrong, it's very hard to shut down because it's so consolidated.
Yeah. And also, they don't want to test. The other thing is the USDA, which I remind people, the USDA is a specialty agriculture commerce agency. It's not a health agency. Is systematically there was a NPR report in which they tried to test raw milk for bird flu. They refused, absolutely refused. And any testing for that. And they won't regulate it. And they were very slow to test it. And they made rules that farmers can decline testing if they want. All these kind of things. It seems like the USDA and these big ag are very hesitant to admit problems. Now, luckily, chickens are pretty cheap. You can cull thousands of chickens, even millions of chickens, and they have insurance. But when it comes to cows and dairy cows, culling dairy cows is very difficult. A lot of these corporations just don't want to test. It's test no evil, see no evil, right? And they just don't want to admit. And of course, PPEs, they cost money. Also, they don't want to alarm anyone. And somehow wearing these PPEs somehow then admits that this thing is getting very serious and potentially out of hand. All these corporations don't want to admit it. And I think they also don't want to test for it. This is the ostrich approach, that if we just ostrich ourselves and stick our head in the sand, that somehow all the world's problems will go away. That's incredibly dangerous. And I think this, we have, by the way, bird flu vaccine stockpiled from years ago. We do have bird flu, but we haven't even started rolling them out, because, there's proposals we should bird flu vaccinate the farm worker population, right? But we haven't done that. It's almost like if we start doing that, then we start admitting that this could threaten the agriculture industry.
And a lot of the owners of these organizations are Republicans themselves, with their own views on profiteering and everything that goes with that.
Yeah.
Do you remember the powdered milk crisis during the pandemic? This is a similar thing, baby milk because there was a contamination in one factory, and again, because all of the baby milk powder is owned by just 2 or 3 companies.
Oh, yeah.
When the largest company had a contamination issue and had to shut down one factory, it meant that nobody could get baby milk, and it was having to be imported from other countries to try and that is another example of how deregulation and these rampant monopolies causes, when there is a problem, such as a contamination or a health issue, that it really impacts consumers, and to the point that babies couldn't feed.
Yeah, I remember this Abbott milk factory shutdown for hygiene issues and health inspection issues. I think in many ways this concentration of power that, in the old days, if it was like hundreds of small farms, thousands of small farms, most farmers will just, say, yeah, we need to protect ourselves. But with corporations, these big corporate farms that now take over, they have so much lobbying power, lobbying muscle power. By the way, Vilsack, the ag secretary, is a former ag secretary. Then he was a, dairy industry lobbyist. And then his agency is part of the reason in many ways is very much behind the ball of what needs to actually get done to mitigate this. And in certain ways, I always think this is the brilliance of America, is that, if someone writes a really great pop song, it can go viral across a huge market, right? As opposed to if you're Polish pop songwriter, you're famous in Poland, and that's about it. But at the same time, in America, when a corporation gets big, it gets big. The corporate muscle, the amount of marketing dollars, lobbying dollars to put towards political influence, it becomes enormous. It's a double-edged sword of America's economic power. Our economy is so great. At the same time, the concentration of certain industries in just 1 or 2 companies makes each of these corporations, bigger than life. And in many ways can harm, market competition, but also the ability of, us to respond to a bird flu pandemic, to get accurate numbers, to get people to wear PPEs. Because if these big companies resist, then there's nothing we can do almost.
Let's talk about the future. I mean, we've mentioned a couple of times that there is the potential for another pandemic and how people might respond. In fact, there was an article this week in Newsweek entitled "The World Must Coordinate Now to Prevent the Next Pandemic." And they said that countries around the world supported by the World Health Organization are seeking to negotiate an agreement to help us beat pandemics, the ones we're currently facing and the ones that we will inevitably face in the future. It's all very well having countries, have plans in place, but you still need the people to go along with that. And obviously in countries where people are more subservient to government, and obviously China was used as an example of this, where their lockdown was extreme. But also, I wasn't living there at the time, but the UK had extreme lockdown measures to the point that, you couldn't go visit your own family, for example. You really could only have so many people gathering in a small, very small group. And the effects of that were, sure, people were protected, but it was very detrimental to British society, partly because the politicians handled it so very badly, leading to eventual resignations. But in the US, it was actually a much more liberal lockdown compared to some of these other countries, just by nature of the fact that people have more of a libertarian attitude towards government. Yeah. So going forward, despite planning, how do you think American people will respond to an announcement that, there is a new virus?
I think, first of all, I think people will, because they've been programmed to be so anti-science, as we were discussing earlier, that somehow they're going to be much more distrustful, right? This built-in distrust of scientists, which is inherently what the right wing propaganda is meant to do. That way, they won't listen to scientists who supposedly want to control their lives, i.e., save your lives. But to them, controlling their lives is somehow much worse.
Much worse than dying, it seems.
Yeah. And I think that there's also this, again, this is a solidarity issue. Like, do you care for other people around you? If you want your society to return to normal faster, you would do everything to help locate, contact trace, test the virus and stop it, right? Yes, it's inconvenient, the quarantine for those who are test positive in isolation, but it's to save people's lives. Now, the next time the virus comes, and I don't know which will become the next pandemic level virus, maybe it's bird flu, maybe it's something else. There's several other, viruses that's causing trouble in Africa right now as well. I think we will be very ill-equipped because of, in many ways, the anti-science, anti-public health rhetoric that's now been built into the programming. Because previously, before 2020, there was no anti-public health programming, right? Public health, the CDC was, basically did the science. But now it's, people, they muzzle, during the Trump era, they muzzled the CDC. Even now today, I think the CDC is very politicized. And, Mandy Cohen was selected for her political chops, not for her public health long-standing career in any way. It's because she's, friendly with the White House chief of staff and longtime political confidant of his. I think whether it's Republican or Democratic president, once the pandemic hit and this right-wing anti-science movement takes over, and even the liberal, COVID minimization, pandemic minimization takes over, I think we might even have a worse next pandemic.
Yeah, I was
because
thinking
the lessons that we initially, we did not really learn our lesson and become more vigilant. Our society, in many ways, and some countries have, but in many ways, our lesson is, distrust the scientists, as opposed to, we should ventilate and disinfect, install HEPA filters in all school classrooms. Instead of that being the lesson, the next lesson is, don't you dare, tell families and kids and what to do, and don't you dare, try to give us another vaccine shot with that you develop, very rapidly because of technology is improved. I don't know. It's just, the global deep state developing a vaccine that was already somehow prepared. You guys develop a vaccine in 6 months. How was that even possible? It's called technology. But next time it happens, it's going to be worse in terms of the denialism against science and against scientists.
The upside to the mRNA vaccine technology, which really was, the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, is that now that technology is being used to find cures for other diseases like cancer.
Right.
And just this week, there was an announcement of a major breakthrough with melanoma, and how an mRNA vaccine can pretty much eradicate, cancerous tumors if administered at the right time and in the right way. I mean, that technology might not have been afforded the opportunity to get investment in research if it wasn't for the COVID pandemic and the haste with which these vaccines were studied.
Right. And in many ways, people forget that BioNTech, the Pfizer vaccine, and Moderna were originally working on these cancer treatments and vaccines against other illnesses before COVID came along. That's why they already had this prepared. I think the anti-mRNA vaccine thing, the right wing, it will change my DNA kind of drama. I'll become a mutant. I've seen lawsuits which say the mRNA vaccine is against God's design because it will change me away from God's design. It's really wild. I think it's very dangerous because then, next time we have a cure for one of these illnesses, and there's many miracle cures to come with mRNA technology. I'm just worried that a lot of people who need it won't get it. That's simple as that at the end of the day. Because the anti-mRNA vaccine rhetoric is just insane. Now, I will acknowledge that some people do have adverse events. It is true there are people with adverse events, but I always remind people there's people with peanut allergies. There's people who are allergic to gluten. There's people allergic to seeds and other kind of like things, and lavender, right? But I think in many ways, just because there are a small number of people who are allergic, and bless their heart, please get an EpiPen, and please, your illness is we still care about it. But the greater preponderance of the lives it saves should not outweigh its use. I always tell people, for example, Advil, this ibuprofen thing that people take all the time. We know it causes cardiovascular events. It causes actually heart attacks if you use it long term, right? But we also know it relieves pain. Now, are you going to completely remove it off the market for that? I'm not a pharmaceutical in any way. I was one of the people who said, who broke the news that Vioxx was very dangerous and caused a lot of different damages to your body. But are you going to withdraw every medicine because it has some side effects? No. And in certain ways, I think this mRNA rhetoric has become this, again, political weapon that just like we can attack masks, we can attack vaccines and mRNA and changing our DNA, whenever it's just not really true, right?
But they don't really care if it's true or not. Maybe that's the thing. The whether it's true or not is irrelevant. It's because they've heard it and they feel like that they have authority because they know something that we don't. And then I've come into contact with people.
It is almost like a flag, a banner they wave. I am anti-mask, anti-mRNA vaccine. I'm a proud patriot. Like these kind of things. It becomes like a dog whistle. It becomes like a natural thing that they want to put a badge on their shoulder or chest and say, haha, I am a good right-wing soldier who will not take mRNA vaccines. And neither should you if you're a good conservative who believes in independence and freedom, blah, blah, blah.
Well, they even turned against Trump, didn't they? Because Trump got vaccinated. Trump started to
really
promote it, didn't he? And then suddenly...
He actually was at a conference.
Yes.
And I think it was actually in Florida or something like that. He actually said, I got the booster shot. I got the vaccine. And he got booed.
Yeah.
He got booed. And in certain ways, he loves to brag, we developed the vaccine faster than anyone possible, and that's the one thing that his audience boos him on. I will admit that Trump's Operation Warp Speed, they did get their act together and develop this. Kudos. But in certain ways, it's the one thing that his base does not want to admit.
Yeah.
Right.
And it was the rollout that was pretty disastrous as well.
Oh, the rollout was horrible, of course.
But the timing of Biden
and the
coming in,
politicization of it that made it, a left wing, only left wing beta weak men get vaccinations.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's this kind of rhetoric is so dangerous. But of course, Trump gets the vaccine. RFK Jr. won't say that his children didn't get the vaccine. I find it very fascinating that it's clearly a political thing.
Okay. Listen, we have to finish, but I'm thrilled that we've had the opportunity to talk about it. Let's keep our fingers crossed that everybody stays healthy and heeds public health advice as and when it happens. And thank you again, Eric, for the work that you do, the research that you do, and also the messaging that you are so very good at. Eric Feigl-Ding, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. See more from me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. And I'll be back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.